Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the TI Apply and IRU European Road Freight Rates Benchmark for Q2 2022. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll just wait a few moments for the attendees to stabilize and then we'll get started. So thanks for joining us today. Okay, great. Well, we've got over 175 attendees joined now. So thanks very much, everyone, for dialing in and joining us. I can see the numbers still ticking up, but I think we'll get started now. So again, welcome everyone to the European Road Freight Rate Benchmark for Q2 2022, brought to you by TI, Apply and IRU. Very pleased to be able to talk you through the latest road freight rate developments as we see from Q2 and we look ahead to the rest of the year. It's been a fantastically interesting time in the road freight market, and we're looking at a very interesting situation now, of course, as we look towards the end of the year. We've seen in Q2 rates hit record highs as fuel prices have gone through the roof. Other supply side factors such as driver shortages still have a bearing on costs increasing. And we're looking ahead really to the next 6 months of those factors still being in play, but also dealing with demand likely dropping off as consumer demand falters across much of Europe with the economic situation. So it's a very interesting time as we see perhaps a turn in freight rates, and we'll be looking ahead as well as looking at what's happened in Q2 during this session. We will be running a presentation here for about 30 minutes, and then afterwards we'll move on to the Q&A session. You can use the Q&A tool on Zoom in order to ask your questions, and please feel free to put your questions in there as we go through the webinar. And then we'll do our best to answer those questions at the end of the session. We'll also send out a recording of the webinar, and as well as that, the actual report on which the webinar is based at the end of the call. So you'll be able to read in much more detail about all of the key issues that we're discussing today. Now, I should introduce our panelists. So I'm Michael Clover, I'm TI's Head of Commercial Development. And TI has provided much of the analysis for this report and across the road freight market. So I'll be hosting your session today. Also joined by Nathaniel Donaldson from TI. He's one of our economic analysts here and takes a lot of work for the report. So hello, Nathan.
Hello, nice to meet you, everyone.
And we're also joined by Marianne Savoni from IRU. Marianne, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Would you like to just give a quick introduction of IRU for those who've joined us who may not know the organization?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon to all. So IRU is the International Road Transport Organization, representing both logistics and passenger sector worldwide, and counting more than 170 members, composed of road transport national associations, but also large corporate companies, including shippers, transport operators, and also service providers.
Thanks, Marianne. And finally, we also have Thomas Leroux, Chief Executive Officer at Apply. Thomas, thanks for joining us. Would you like to introduce yourself and Apply?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Michael. And hello, everybody. So Apply is a company that we created in 2018, and the main idea is to mix the business expertise that we have in road transportation and supply chain in general with the data and tech people that we have inside at Apply to collect data and to bring some analytics regarding the price and the volumes of transportation worldwide.
Thanks, Thomas. And we'll just move on to the methodology in a moment, but I need to just read out our little statement here, which is to say that we remind you all that all discussions and statements made by participants on commercially or strategically sensitive information may fall within the scope of competition law and be considered as unlawful. And we invite you to refrain from sharing any information of such nature or entering into any such discussion, including during breaks. But now we'll move on, just give Thomas the opportunity to give a little bit of an overview of the methodology we used to compile the freight rate data we'll be sharing today from Apply. So Thomas, would you like just to give us an overview of this?
Yes, of course. We decided this time to start with the methodology because we received a lot of questions during the presentation. The slides that you will see later on our slides based on real data that we are collecting directly from the market, from shippers and from freight forwarders. These are data that today is just limited to full truckload in Europe for general cargo. We have spot and contractual prices, so you will see both lanes on the graphs, and the fuel is included. This is important because, of course, we have a lot of other data and on different type of transportation, LTL or reefer or bulk, but here, so it's FTL, fuel included, and we have spot and contractual prices.
Thanks, Thomas. Yes, and it's very exciting this time to be able to bring you spot and contract rates as a new thing for this particular webinar. So, yeah, very exciting. So we'll move on, I think, to some of the data here. We're looking in this instance at the overall European picture, and obviously, you know, over Q2, what we saw were some pretty steep price increases. Nathan, would you take us through that?
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael. So as Thomas mentioned, we now show both contract and spot rates, and we've created an index for both, which allows deeper analysis into both and tracking the trends both along each quarter. So if we look first at the contract market in Europe, this benchmark is made up by some of the major lanes across the continent, and the contract market is increased by 6.1 points in the second quarter. That's taking it to 121 points on our new index, and that's an increase of 13.1 points year on year, and that's after 4 consecutive quarters of rate rises in that 12-month period. So that's a new all-time high for the contract market. And if we go over to the spot market, we're again seeing a new all-time high. So it's now hit 134 points. And that actually grew nearly twice the rate of the contract market, with prices up 11.8 points quarter on quarter and 21.1 points year on year. Now, what we're seeing here, the real effects of the increase in fuel prices during the end of quarter one. So we saw the increases in March, and now we saw pre-tax EU diesel prices increase 62%. And now this was limited to an average increase at the pump of around 26%. And this came thanks to cuts in fuel duty that actually cost European governments over 15 billion euros. And this is now increased since we've had further extensions from countries such as Italy to extend their duty cuts. So these diesel prices held after their increase in March, and we've seen them staying high while they haven't decreased in some countries that we'll come on to later. They've held high and kept the rates high, with the carriers facing the higher costs throughout quarter two. So we're really seeing that effect in the rates here, which has pushed them up to new all-time highs. In terms of demand, quarter two is showing quite a new picture compared to what we've seen over the previous quarters. So the cost of push rates up, the demand is actually falling as we're seeing consumer confidence and business confidence falling throughout European economies and putting less pressure on the rate throughout this quarter and into the next quarter. So we're also seeing record inflation in the euro area at 8.6%. This is the highest since the euro has been adopted, and we're seeing that this is deterring consumers and industries from demanding the same volume of goods that they were before. So we're seeing the actual volume of the goods falling. And then we're also now seeing uncertainty in gas supplies. We're seeing falling consumer demand, and we're seeing higher interest rates. So this is deterring further increase in production and increase in investment from industries. So while we're seeing that the costs have pushed rates up in quarter two, kept them high, now seeing demand drop off and providing less pressure on the rates.
Yeah, a very interesting situation really with all the economic pressures on the market now. So we'll be seeing some more of the impact of that, I'm sure, over the upcoming quarters. But thank you very much, Nathan. Now we thought we'd also dive in a bit deeper just to look at the fuel price development as well. And this is actually broken down over, I think, as a weekly basis. So our freight rates here are given in quarters, but this shows you the timing of the impact of fuel prices, obviously front loaded towards really that big rise at the start of Q2, end of Q1. But Marianne, could you just take us through some of this?
Yeah, of course. As we are looking at freight prices evolution, of course, this graph is quite important to have a look on what is happening on a weekly basis for the key European markets. Diesel prices account normally for 1/3 of total operating transport costs. And the weight is likely to increase up to 50% of total cost operations. As you can see quite clearly here is that diesel prices at pump average in the main European countries in Q2 see an increase of 13% versus Q1, with an average prices at the pump of 1.9 euros per litre. Prices of diesel at UK pump is the highest versus the rest of the European countries, sitting at more than 2.3 euro per litre mid-July. Many European countries have cut fuel duty to limit the impact of price increase, costing to European governments around 15 billion euros in total. When having a look on crude oil prices, they decreased in early July with an average $105 per barrel versus June, which was a little bit higher with $116 per barrel. So this decrease is the response to some indications of a slowing economic growth. The Eurozone is reporting its lowest PMI since August 2020. And so despite this economic data, crude oil prices remain high, and likely as a result of low inventories and also the continued uncertainty clearly around the Russians' future oil supply. And so this situation clearly suggests that pressure on carriers will remain extremely high until the end of the year.
Yes, thanks, Marianne. Yeah, interesting to see that decrease coming through and the lag that takes to get through to pump prices, but starting to see a bit of a change there. Now, of course, fuel prices it has a huge impact on rates, Marianne explaining, bigger than it used to, of course. But there's other, supply side impacts as well. And we've got some more great data from IRU on driver shortages. So, Marianne, would you talk us through this?
Yeah. So this is the other key factor on putting pressure on rates is the driver shortage indeed. At the end of the year, as you can see on the graph, the shortage of drivers is forecasted to increase in Europe, reaching 14% of unfilled driver positions, meaning a 40% increase versus last year. As you can see here on the graph, as a reminder for 2021, we estimated already up to 425,000 missing driver positions. Aging truck driver workforce is the main driver of the deterioration of the situation, with an average age of the European truck driver population of 47 years old. This is that there is a large proportion of drivers close to retirement. 34% are above 50 years old. And whereas the share of young drivers is too low to replace the significant number of truck drivers that will retire in the next 10 years. And as you can see, indeed, on this following slide, there are around 7% of truck drivers under 25 years old in Europe. The Netherlands is a country where you can find the highest proportion of young drivers, around 12.5%, while UK is the country with the lowest proportion, around 2.2%. In fact, the required minimum age to become a driver is 18 years old in some European countries, such as Spain or Italy, but goes up to 21 years old in other countries, such as France or UK. So this means that young people have to wait at least 3 years, the end of their studies, and the moment they can become a truck driver. And additionally, in most countries, practical driving lessons cannot start before 18 years old, which is also a discouraging factor for youth, as they cannot start driving during their vocational training. So this is what we can say on this situation here.
Yes, I mean, that does not show us, this graphic here does not show a great deal of hope for young drivers coming through, but as you say, there may be some changes that could be made to open up that flow of drivers. So thank you, Marianne. Okay, well, we like to include this graphic here just to show the range of different rates across Europe. And Thomas, would you like to give a few comments on the sort of data coverage in this release?
Yes, I mean, here on the slides, we are using only one type of data that we have regarding what you will find directly in the PDF that you will receive at the end of the webinar. You will have this map for spot and contractual prices. This is a nice view of all the combinations that we can do on Europe. But here I won't go in a deep analysis here, because this is, let's say, the introduction of the coming slides, where we will look at France versus France to Spain, Italy to Germany, and all the combinations that we might have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we'll dive into the individual trends there, but obviously if you do want to access this kind of rate data in more detail, then you can go to Upply, and they have, of course, the weekly data available there as well. All right, let's take us through to the first lane we're looking at in detail then, and this is really Madrid to Paris. You can see some, again, sizable increases there, and Nathan, could you talk us through this?
Yeah, sure. So this is similar to the benchmark. This is a lane where we're seeing oil prices hit an all-time high. Now the spot rates into Paris on the head haul are up by 20.9% quarter on quarter. And then we're seeing the backhaul rates in the spot market up 21.2% quarter on quarter. So when we're looking at the contract rate, contract market, we're seeing smaller increases. So we're seeing increases of 6.4% on the head haul into Paris. And then we're seeing 5.7% increase quarter on quarter on the backhaul into Madrid. Now, a big driver here on these large increases is the cost for the Spanish market. So this is what we can see, that Spain has actually seen some of the largest prices increase at the pump for diesel. So it's now up 45% versus the start of the year as of time of writing in July. And that's compared to around a 25% increase at the pump in countries like France and Germany. So this is adding a significant amount of pressure for French carriers or French drivers. Now, this is also causing further unrest in the labour market. So the market is now seeing an uncertain supply. Now, the country did face significant strikes in March, which really crippled the transport of fresh produce, especially into Spain's main exporter, France. Now, the country narrowly avoided another strike with a 45% vote for further negotiations versus a 40% vote for strike action. So it means that strike action still remains on the cards. Now, this pressure is coming as a result of, we're also seeing French demand growing. So it's stable. The French economy is resilient. They're facing around 5% inflation, which is lower than the Euro average. But consumption is falling, and French consumers are spending less on luxury goods.
Yeah, so leading to some high price increases there over Q2. All right, well, we'll move on to the next lane here, which is looking at Duisburg to Warsaw, so Germany to Poland. And this lane, if you contrast the data here, we're seeing less significant price increases than we have across other lanes, certainly relative to the Spain-France lane we've just seen there. So, and that is part driven really by the difference in the economies, with the French economy obviously sustaining quite a good performance over Q2 relative to some other European countries. And we've seen demand really drop in Germany and Poland. For instance, I think in June, the Polish PMI measure was down by 5.5 points. So quite a substantial drop off in demand there. And so that has meant that even though we've seen some very substantial fuel price increases in these countries on these lanes, that hasn't had the same impact it has on other lanes because of the demand side of the market. So we're not seeing quite such large increases on this particular lane, really, which is quite interesting. Obviously, both economies, obviously particularly with Germany, are very manufacturing-led. We've seen volumes really down in those areas. So there has been some recovery in the automotive sector, for instance. Overall demand, the demand picture is much weaker. And this, I think, is an interesting example of a lane and the dynamics that we may see playing out across much of the rest of Europe over the second half of the year, because we would expect to see that lower demand playing a much more significant role in rates as maybe we see plateaus and perhaps dropping off through the rest of the year. So an interesting indicator of potentially things to come in the future. Now, the next lane we're focusing on here again is one of our other high volume lanes. This is France, Germany, Duisburg, Paris. Thomas, could you take us through this one?
Yes, here we clearly see that we have a strong increase if you're looking at spot rates on both legs, inbound and outbound. The increase is quite sharp. If we're looking at the spot rates on the head haul into Paris, we have an increase of about 18% on the quarter to quarter, so very strong increase. This is a bit less in the spot part, in the contractual part, but the increase is quite important here on a quarter to quarter. I will try to give some explanations about that. First, we have what we talked before, and Nathaniel, you talk about it. We have a French economy that is quite resilient. If we are looking at the expenditure on engineered goods, they're decreasing, but very slowly, and are quite stable. We have a decrease of about 1.5%. So it means that the French economy is still buying some engineered goods from the German economy. And there is another point also that we talked 3 months ago at the last webinar that was regarding the car demand and all this part that were not in a good shape at the beginning of the year. And it seems that the car production is increasing right now. The ship crisis has significantly decreased. And when we are looking at Mercedes and BMW, for example, they have released some figures regarding their production over the last 2 months, and the production increased by about 13 points from March to July or June. And a year to year, this is an increase about 20% of the car production. So it means that there is a demand for this transportation between France and Germany, and this puts pressure on the prices, and this explains the increase of price that we see here. Of course, fuel price is also an important part, but if we are looking globally at Europe, we are seeing that some country-to-country pairs see a higher increase, and this is linked to specificities between the economies and specificities between the demand also.
Thanks, Thomas. Yes, that's why it's so important to look at these individual lanes. The next one we're highlighting actually here is the UK or GB to France, and looking at the trends there. Obviously, lots of disruption on this lane in recent weeks, but Marianne, can you take us through what happened in Q2?
Yeah. So you can see clearly here the significant increase of the freight rates on the last 2 quarters. July data show that the price of diesel at UK pump is the highest, as you saw previously, versus the rest of the European countries, with the 2.3 euro per liter. This is, as a reference, 16% higher than French prices. In addition, when having a look on the weeks between the 23rd of May and the 14th of July, diesel prices fell in all major European countries except for the UK. So this suggests that diesel has played a significant role here in the Q2 price rises and will continue to inflate rates in the coming months. The cost of labor, in another side, in Great Britain and France has been stable, but inflation is adding pressure to increase wages. The demand from both countries has been subdued and is weakening going into Q3. In May, UK consumers faced a 40-year high inflation rate of 9.1%, and the Bank of England expects this will exceed 11% by October. French consumers face less extreme inflation. However, Banque de France expects inflation to reach up to 7% by the end of the year. The demand from the French economy is weakening, but at a slower rate than what we see in UK. Falling economy is not the only factor that has reduced the demand on this route. Following Brexit, the journeys on this route has become more costly and time-consuming.
Yes. Certainly, and obviously we've seen a lot of disruption in terms of border crossing and delays and so on over the last few weeks as well. So we'll have to watch that carefully in Q3, though it seems that that has been alleviated in the last couple of weeks, turned to more normal conditions there. Okay, well, we'll turn to our next lane here, which is looking at Spain, and we're looking at really export lanes here from Spain. Nathan, could you take us through this?
Yeah, sure. So this is an interesting lane. We've actually seen a significant divergence between the spot and the contract rates. So the Spanish international road freight rates actually saw the largest average increase, with Spanish export lanes increasing 15% faster than the European average, and the import lanes increasing 29% faster than the European average. Now, the gap, as I mentioned, the gap between the contract and the spot lanes has widened. Spot rates are now 29% more expensive than contract rates, and that's actually the largest difference in Europe. In the spot market, we're seeing the Spanish export lanes, the prices on Spanish export lanes grew by 12.9%, while the import lanes increased by 14.4%. On the other hand, in the contract market, rates grew at a slower 9.3% quarter on quarter for imports, and then export lanes grew in a similar amount. Now, this is interesting because that's nearly 1.5 times the European average. So we're seeing a lot of pressure, upward pressure on the Spanish rates, especially the contract rates on international lanes. Now, as mentioned on the France to Spain lane, we're seeing a lot of pressure internally. Now, Spanish drivers make up the majority of most drivers on Spanish international lanes. Now, we're seeing uncertainty in the supply, further pressure for strikes, and we're also seeing large increases in the industrial price index in Spain. So that's up 44 points versus last year. So 44 points year on year. This is eroding the profits and putting more pressure on self-employed Spanish truckers who are demanding larger rates and to cover their increasing costs. At the same time, the Spanish demand is putting less pressure on the rates. Now, inflation in Spain at time of writing was 10.2%, and the average Spanish shop has increased by 9.4% for consumers. That's 12.2% at some major retailers. So we're seeing a lower volume of goods demanded from the Spanish economy, but high industry prices have pushed rates up. We should see that demand has put less pressure on rates and will continue to put less pressure on rates from Spain with its high consumer and industry prices.
Very interesting, yes. And we've also picked out another lane here, which is looking at particularly lanes from France to ports, and really we selected this because we see a real spike in pricing here. So an interesting one to take a look at. Thomas, could you take us through this?
Yes, I'll try to be quite quick because I see that we are running out of time. But here, the idea was to have a look at. So this is France to to Rotterdam and Antwerp, but this is also true for Germany or some other countries to this port. The key point and what we wanted to put here and to emphasize on is that we have, these ports have faced some challenges and mainly congestions. If we are looking at the month of July, Merckx put a warning that the congestion was at a continuously critical levels, meaning that there are problems of congestion, and Hapag-Lloyd on their side has introduced a blanket surcharges to encourage the shippers to collect and deliver the containers. So there is a strong pressure on the fact that getting the containers quickly, and there is more and more cost added to the carrier side because you need to wait on the congestion parts, and the costs are higher. So here we see a strong increase about 12 to 13%. And then there is also an issue of offer because the river level, the Rhine river level is quite low due to low water, and so there is no this substitution between truck and boats within the Rhine river. So there is these two parts here, where there is congestion plus this substitution that is not working that much, that put pressure on the rates right now.
Yes, and again, it's one of those things where we think there's going to be more industrial action, congestion is likely to continue, so there may be factors that carry on in the future too. Thank you, Thomas. And we also like, I think, to not just show international lanes, we've got some really great data coming through from Upply on the domestic markets as well. Here we're able to show for the first time in this presentation a measure of German domestic rates. Nathan, could you talk us through the trend here?
Sure, I can go through this one quickly. So with the German market, again, we're seeing new all-time highs. So with this new data available, but it does go back to Q1 2017. We've seen the largest increases in the spot rates, so they're up 24 points now to 159, and in the contract market, we've seen it increase 12 points quarter on quarter, up to 131. So we're seeing twice the amount of change. So the spot rate is changing twice the rate of the contract. Now, this is largely, again, a quick reaction to rising diesel prices. So initially, German carriers faced some of the largest increases in Europe. So with prices up at the pump 28% in March. They have now trended downwards, and they are sitting 7% below their March peak now. Now, we're also seeing an ease of demand, but an increase of demand in Germany at the same time. So we're seeing industry and consumer confidence and expenditure falling and demanding fewer, a smaller volume of goods. However, in Germany at the moment, the Rhine is at record low levels. Now, this is forcing river carriers to operate at lower capacities, lower loads. They're also introducing surcharges. This has increased the cost of river freight, and it has pushed more pressure onto the road industry, and also increased the cost of German domestic freight at the moment.
Thanks, Nathan. Yes, so prices rising there. And we're also showing the Italian domestic rates. This will be our last chart for the day, but Marianne, could you take us through this?
Yeah, so as you can see here, the spot and the contract rates are following a similar trend during the Q2 2022. Both reached new all-time highs, with the largest quarter-on-quarter increase since Q1 2017. Rising costs in the Italian market caused significant industrial unrest during Q1, and the further increase in the price of diesel has caused this to continue into Q2. Italian carriers have been grappling with the effects of rising fuel prices, which are now 21% higher than January. Diesel prices increase have been limited to below the European average, thanks to excise duty reductions implemented by the government in March. Like the rest of Europe, the Italian market is struggling with a significant driver shortage, with an estimated deficit of up to 20,000 missing drivers. The driver shortage is, of course, increasing the cost of labor, and some road transport companies are now offering a 6,000 euros bonus to encourage drivers to join the profession. While rising costs and lack of capacity push Italian rates up, falling demand from Italian industry and consumers is reducing the upward pressure on rates. And consumer confidence and demand are also being constrained by high inflation, which was over 8% in June. So the evidence is there and suggests that Italian demand for road freight will fall in Q3, and so provide less upward pressure on rates.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, after this chart shows very stark increases for the last 2 quarters, it'll be very interesting to see what happens over the next quarter or so with rate development here. So we'll be keeping an eye on all this data, and tracking the changes that we see. That actually rounds off our presentation for today. So thanks very much for all the panelists' contributions. And now we can open up for a Q&A session. So I can see we've had quite a few questions already coming through during the presentation. Please feel free to make or put down some more now. We'll try and get through as many as we can. I think the first one we'll probably answer would be the question around the drivers' workforce, and probably one for Marianne here on what's being done to boost young drivers in in the market. So Marianne, would you like to answer that?
Very big question. Very good and very big question. A lot of things are currently implemented at different levels today to try to find solutions and to attract young to the profession. First, trainings are more and more developed by companies, transport operators, internally, and then so trying to find the good content and the good trainings to be relevant for the profession. But also the transport operators are a lot working with the national associations of their countries to be supported in terms of content of training and also understanding exactly the situation. And also from our side, from IRU side, we're also supporting with a specific program we developed, which is Road Masters, which is a kind of program of evaluation of the drivers that also supports or can support the transport operators to indeed to evaluate and bring more interest from the young. In fact, something I wanted to mention here as well is all what is done today by the national associations in partnership with the unemployment agencies in Europe. In fact, it is the case in France. The National Association FNTR is a lot working with the Pôle emploi in order to find or develop specific trainings to bring interest or to attract interest to the profession, which is the case in Brittany, in the north of France. Specific projects and programs developed there. And also, and you saw it also during the presentation, also specific bonus and also increase of wages are also proposed by the transport operator. We saw the example of Italy with a bonus of 6,000 euros, which is proposed to bring interest. And just to finish on this, because it is a topic we are a lot following in IRU, we are developing specific sessions internally with our members, with a specific notably webinar on best practices. And I suggest here that I can share some of these examples after this webinar, so it can give you more, examples, and then it is, I think, good to bring ideas also and to share these best practices for our community. But we have a lot of examples that can be sharing it here.
Brilliant, thank you, Marianne. I'm sure lots of people will be interested to see those. Yeah, so thanks for that. We also have, well, we've got lots of questions actually. There's another one here from Deepak Samavadam, which is saying, I'd like to know, since freight rates are increasing, is there any surge in contract pricing or hedging the prices from shippers? Thomas, would you like to answer this?
Yeah, I will try to, because this one is quite linked also, I think, from a lot of questions that we have. What are the expectations for Q3 or Q4? What we see on the market right now is shippers that are wondering if this is a good time to renew their tender or not, to go with a new RFQ, because the prices are increasing, and even the contractual one, and we see that contracts prices are increasing right now, and it's quite normal today for a shipper to come on the market and receive an increase of between 10 to 15% of rates, even in the contractual one. Regarding the what will come, of course, we are not magicians, we cannot tell exactly, but what we see right now and from the past weeks, we see a decrease in price. We see a decrease in price over the past week, and we don't anticipate a strong decrease. We are more seeing a stabilization of the prices. They increase a lot and then they start to be stable. The big question will be what will happen for the peak season, the end of year peak season. But right now, we see prices that are decreasing slightly. We see also a demand across Europe that is decreasing. Economy, we are hearing a lot about recessions right now. So this might have a global impact on the level of prices. And then the big question will be to see exactly if the price will decrease a bit over the following weeks, to then start to increase again at the end of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a big question really at the moment, isn't it? Well, as we reach this turning point in the industry, what's going to happen with prices? But certainly the latest data from Upply does show that there's starting to be a bit of a drop off there. So thanks very much for that, Thomas. Now, we've also got quite a few more questions coming through here about various other sort of price changes. I think I saw another one here, which maybe would be a good one for Marianne to answer, but just while I look for that one again, there's a comment here mentioning that we talk a lot about driver shortages and age, and we're talking a lot about fuel prices, but maybe we haven't spoken about the impact of the war in Ukraine. And I think, yes, that's very true. We spoke about that quite a lot in the last paper, in the last webinar, where we looked at Ukrainian and Russian drivers being taken out of the workforce, and that has had a big impact on the driver shortage, particularly in Eastern Europe. So, that's certainly another factor that is adding to the mix to bring bring prices up as well. So, yeah, that's definitely a substantial factor in there. There's also a question here which is just talking about a specific lane, looking at Benelux to Lithuania, and obviously this white paper tends to cover, it doesn't cover the Baltics, it doesn't cover the Balkans, but I think Thomas, there is more data coming through from Upply around those other parts of Europe as well. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. So we have seen that at the beginning, and you will see it also in the report. There is a coverage over European countries, and we have data on Romania, on Hungary, or certain countries. Some are weak regarding data. The data that we have on these countries for some are weak, but you can see it very clearly, and then you can just benchmark it on the website, knowing that we have good or not good data.
Yeah, brilliant. All right, thanks, Thomas. There's other questions here as well around, data on labour costs and things like that. That's something actually at TI we track labour costs in different countries for transportation around Europe as well. So if you want to see some of that data to bring that into your analysis, you can reach out to TI as well. There's a question here which is on the mobility package and the impact that's likely to have on capacity. So what is the role of mobility package in these price changes, and how will this influence available capacity? Marianne, would you like to try and answer that one?
Yeah, so on this one, so the impact, this is something that we are a lot monitoring since the beginning and the implementation of mobility package. So a lot of still, in the middle of the year, many European member states are still lagging behind their obligation to transpose and publish the information on the conditions applicable to posting in their country. So this is the first thing to mention here. Around 6 countries fully implemented the procedure. To date, we are trying to estimate what is impact, what we can expect on the cost, and notably the impacts due to the as we say the coming back of the 8 days to the truck drivers to his country. What we can say here, and this is an estimation which has been done since the beginning of the consultation by the European Commission. The impact could amount to as much as 10,000 per truck, euro per truck, for carriers from Eastern Europe operating in Eastern Europe, which represents around 10% increase comparing to a normal business as usual year. This is something that we try to adjust or to see if it is still relevant according to all the context that we can see here, the context in Ukraine, the context of the different inflation, the prices, etc. So this is something that we are monitoring, and so to make sure we can have a better estimation of the impact in the coming months.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Marianne. Yeah, so some other interesting questions coming through here as well, asking whether it's a good idea to have a new tender for road freight services in autumn. Well, it's a good question. That's a very difficult business decision for you to take there, I suppose, Raphael. But as we've said a little bit about the Q3, Q4 pricing, environment, we're expecting to see a drop off in prices. So it may well be, but obviously there's a lot of volatility in the market as well, and that will be looking ahead towards peak season as well, where, as Thomas says, we may see some other pricing pressures coming in there as well. So just a few things to think about there. Another question here, which is asking about sustainability in the road freight market, looking at how road freight operators are able to bring in alternative fuel vehicles into their fleets. Yeah, that's something that we've been tracking at TI as well, looking at the move over towards alternative fuels and electric vehicles, more so electric vehicles and vans and last mile fleets, really more than road freight. Yeah, we have been seeing that. Obviously, we've seen a big problem just across the board in sourcing new vehicles with the challenges in the automotive sector over the last couple of years. So it has become more expensive to purchase the trucks as well. But we do see some major investments in fleets, and that's certainly something which is a growing trend. Tends to be more focused around the very large operators, though. Something which probably be increasingly important into 2023, 2024 as it filters down and through. There's a question here which is also maybe one for Thomas, which is just asking about rates per kilometre, if they're looking for data on a by country level for rates per kilometre. Is that something that the Apply data?
Yes, of course. We have indexes in full trucks, I mean, the cost of full trucks, but also rate euro per kilometer for a specific, of course, origin destination. But of course, we have this kind of data.
Yeah, brilliant. All right, so get in touch with Apply if you want to take on that data. I think we've reached the end of the session now at 3:45 European time. So thanks very much, everyone, for joining us. We've had, I think, nearly 400 attendees in the session today, so we appreciate that. Hopefully, we were able to share some good insights with you all today and share some great data. If you do have any further questions about the data, then please do get in touch with us. You can see here the various contact details for different organisations. So please do reach out to us with any further questions if you want to carry on the conversation or want to know more about the data and services we've shown today. You can reach out with the contact details here. Which all remains really for now for me to say thank you very much to Marianne, Thomas and Nathan for your time and your insights this afternoon. It's been a really interesting webinar, and we hope you'll all download the paper and take a good look at that.